What's up, everybody? We are live with the Awesemo Fanduel show. I am your host, Matt Gajewski. I am here with my partner in crime, Kyle Dvorchak. You can follow me on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. You can follow him at Kyle Tweets here. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. That's the best way to support Kyle, myself, the entire Awesemo crew as we push our way to 50K subscribers. We are going to get there eventually, hopefully by the end of the year. But it is Friday. We are a day late with our Fanduel breakdown. Of course, a little shakeup in the week because of Thanksgiving. Kyle, how was the holiday for you? How was that 2-game NFL action?
It's not a great game for me, but I don't know. It was interesting to approach it kind of like a showdown slate where it's maybe the most priority function is to just build unique lineups. And boy, did I take that approach, and I got pumped for it. I will say, luckily, and this is maybe a good lesson, is that one, I swapped off a decent amount of my Ezekiel Elliott because any lineup I had didn't have Deshaun Watson. And so anytime I had Zeke, I was like, well, we need Zeke to go out and get 2 or 3 points and me to like perfectly leverage that to even min cash at this point, or Alex Smith to score 30 points. He did not. He was terrible. And the offense put up points. It just didn't trickle down to Smith. So it wasn't a great week, but my late swaps off Zeke saved me a little bit. And maybe the biggest lesson I learned is that after seeing what Deshaun Watson did, I should have been more aggressive. Even in the lineups where I just played like solo Will Fuller and, Texans defense or whatever. It looked like a good lineup. I knew I was drawing so dead to make it up, or I should have known. I was drawing so dead to make it up at quarterback, whether I had Dalton or Smith, which I had some of both, that I should have had 0 Zeke going into the second game. And I had some. I was like, oh, this lineup's good enough. I could still do something with it. Not good enough. So I should have been more aggressive with my swaps. I did some of it, which helped, but not enough.
Yeah, I don't hate what you did at all. Going back and looking at the slate, I think playing some of the contrarian quarterbacks was a smart idea. Obviously, Deshaun Watson hit, so the chalk hits there. I mean, you're going to have that some years. It wasn't that long ago. I remember last year's Thanksgiving where David Blau put up a competitive game. So we do see this. It's a small game sample. So, without diving too much into it, I think your decision-making was good. It was a good holiday for me, riding solo. I cooked some ground turkey, very, very festive on my hot plate in my kitchen. So I was excited. But today, we're here to talk Fanduel. Everything Fanduel, how this show works. We are going to go position by position, talk all the intricacies of the Fanduel slate. I am a little upset with Fanduel. They're flip-flopping in the win because I can't play Taysom Hill at tight end anymore. They changed it. Now he's just a quarterback. I wish they would have left it. It would have been cool to have, like a 8K Taysom Hill at tight end, but we don't have that. We have a legit slate. There's not too much news heading into the week. We're still waiting on the status of a couple of people like Salvin Ahmed, really the only players out already. John Brown, Larry Fitzgerald. It looks like the Ravens are going to be down like every player on their team.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that game gets played, honestly. I know Schefter tweeted out that they're fairly uncertain that they get played or something. I wouldn't really spend too much time on it because they have turned up positive tests as early as yesterday. On the off chance they do play, it was Jackson and both running backs, Dobbins and Ingram, that are so far out, I believe.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's more, but we won't hit on that right now. We'll wait for that news as the week comes to us. As far as starting with the quarterback position, this is a Fanduel slate, kind of what we're used to. Last week, we had just a couple games totaled above 50 points. This week, we are back to a few monster total games. The big ones, of course, Buffalo is one. There's a few here, and that's where I want to start ownership at quarterback because Josh Allen is coming in significantly more owned than any other quarterback on the slate. He is 16.5% on Fanduel. And once we look behind Josh Allen, the next most owned quarterback is Patrick Mahomes, and he's 11.7%. I kind of like getting away from Josh Allen just because I do think there's good options at a variety of prices and a variety of ownerships. Pat Mahomes and even Kyler Murray, just 10% owned on this slate, are two very good options, and you're not eating a ton of ownership with them. What are you doing in this high price range, this high ownership range?
Yeah, for me, the high ownership range, I guess if I were to have to pick one right now, there's maybe, you could argue 3. There's 1 mega chalk, Josh Allen, and 2 semi chalk. They're pretty far off, but it's still within, 10 or so percent of Patrick Mahomes and Kyler Murray. I guess it would be Patrick Mahomes, although I'm not, I'm kind of with you. I'm fine moving off of these both expensive and highly owned guys, even when you look at at the same game as Josh Allen, Justin Herbert on the other side, a little cheaper. Maybe being the underdog in this game can help them flip their script from generally run heavy relative to the rest of the league to maybe a more balanced / pass heavy approach. He's cheaper. He's been just as good essentially as Josh Allen. I don't get why you wouldn't take the ownership discount to go to a Justin Herbert. And even like, especially because all of the chalk is so expensive, you have to get to number 4 quarterback at, 10% less than Josh Allen, Derek Carr, to find a cheap quarterback. Then back to number 5, it's Justin Herbert at 8,400. Just paying for not paying for an expensive quarterback, just paying down at a cheap spot, potentially even like Tom Brady's a little cheap. Matt Ryan gets you even cheaper. Like Kirk Cousins kind of gross, but I actually think that's a really interesting game to target. So either side of that, Kirk Cousins, and right now we have Teddy Bridgewater projected, or we have PJ Walker projected. I think Teddy Bridgewater's going to end up playing, I think. But just paying down in general could be the way to not only get off of the high-owned quarterbacks, but more importantly, it's going to lead you to an entirely unique build across your roster. So you get obviously, 10, 12, whatever percent ownership discount off of a Josh Allen, but you're necessarily going to find yourself playing more unique guys. So for me, I think Matt Ryan is maybe one of the more interesting ones. I really like Tom Brady as well. But any of these guys, I think you could pitch me just on the fact that, one, they're low owned, but maybe more importantly is that they get you on a different build entirely.
Yeah, just a heads up, our show sheet is no longer up to date. We got an ownership projection update right before the show started, which seems to happen to us every single week. So make sure you pull up ownership. Josh Allen's actually coming in higher owned than what we had on our show sheet. 18% for Josh Allen. Anytime we really see that, I'm pretty much just going to fade Josh Allen, unless I can stack him with someone contrarian, which I don't think we'll see because John Brown is already out. So if you're paying for an expensive receiver, it's obviously going to be Stephon Diggs. If you're paying for someone cheaper, it's likely going to be Cole Beasley. And then the other players on the other side will be semi-chalky as well. Speaking of which, Justin Herbert, he's one of these players I like who is technically in the top 5 most owned quarterbacks, but he's only coming in at 6.8%. If you want access to one of the highest total games on the slate, I think you can gain some leverage by going over to the Justin Herbert side. Justin Herbert, obviously, he's been extremely efficient. I think part of the reason people don't want to roster him is he keeps throwing touchdowns to Gabe Neighbors and Tyron Johnson, these creative players. But I also think that lends itself to friendly stacking environments at lower ownership. There's obviously Keenan Allen. But what I like most about Herbert is you can get contrarian with him. Mike Williams comes in at a cheaper price. He's not typically a high-owned quarterback. Hunter Henry also fills a dreadful tight end position, which you're actually going to have to fill on Fanduel yourself this week. So I don't know. I like getting to Herbert in this kind of high-powered offensive environment on a team that runs a ton of plays. Do you have any interest?
Oh, yeah. I think he's the one guy at both high price and high ownership, like of that Venn diagram. He's the only one I'd really be interested in getting over the field on because he's not that highly owned. He still gives you access to like arguably the best game of the slate. Let me pull up the totals on this game. I know it was sitting somewhere at like 55 and a half. I think it was that and the Tampa Bay, Kansas City game were the two guys. Right now it's at 53, and I think Tampa Bay is at 55 or something. One of the 3 right now. Yeah, one of the 3 highest totals of the main slate. He has been incredibly efficient. He throws touchdowns at a crazy clip. And like you said, I think people are afraid to do maybe anything outside of Keenan Allen because we've seen like Keenan Allen has absolutely crushed. It's been kind of the Mike Williams and the Hunter Henrys who produce more sporadically. I'm okay buying into the sporadic nature of their scoring because they're on the field for most of the snaps. They're getting most of the targets. I still believe that and I think we've seen this more recently as well. We've gotten back-to-back touchdowns from Hunter Henry. We've gotten Keenan Allen scoring touchdowns. I think we're going to see continually less, and we've already seen it happen, less of your Donald Parhams, Gabe Neighbors, Jalen Guytons be scoring touchdowns. And it's going to funnel its way to the guys like Mike Williams, who I think would be like the ideal contrarian stack to go with the Justin Herbert stack.
I agree with you. I like that stack a lot. There is one quarterback I really want to isolate here because I think he's kind of a cut of his own among the highly owned quarterbacks on this slate. Among the top 5, they are all at least 8.4K, except Derek Carr. On FanDuel, Derek Carr is 7,100. He is clearly the pay down option for this slate, and it makes sense. He's in a good matchup against Atlanta. My question to you is, if you're playing Derek Carr, I mean, how do you stack with him? If you stack with Darren Waller, who is every single slate, you can almost guarantee Darren Waller is a top 5 on tight end because of just how desolate the position is. And outside of Darren Waller, I mean, do you feel comfortable with Nelson Aguilar? Do you feel comfortable with Henry Ruggs? I certainly do not. So just playing Derek Carr for me, I typically don't get to him.
Yeah, one, he's highly owned, which already makes you just have to weigh the fact of like what are his odds of hitting relative to his ownership. I don't think it's that bad. I think like quarterback ownership is one thing. It really depends on the stacking ownership. And like you said, the primary stacking option, Darren Waller, as is every slate, is going to be popular simply because tight end is so bad, like you laid out. So your stack isn't going to be that unique unless you do something ugly. I'm of the opinion that Nelson Aguilar is less ugly. I'm not saying it's not ugly, but it is less.
Look who's come around to Nelson Aguilar. You told me to never play him.
I know, I probably did. I really didn't think that he would be anything more than this ancillary piece in this offense. And he's still a distant number 2 receiver because of how incredibly volume laden Darren Waller is. But he has separated himself as the number 1 wide receiver on this team by a pretty considerable margin. He's running like the second or third most routes on the team, but he's easily leading the team in wide receiver targets because they refuse to use Henry Ruggs in a way that is conducive to any sort of production from him. Henry Ruggs right now is running like a majority of his routes are like goes, outs, and like deep corners. That's not even hardly what he was used in college. He did some of that, but they also schemed him open on a lot of like screens and slants and stuff. And people would always pitch to me. I was like, well, that's not how he's like it's just weird for a guy who runs like a 4-2 to get used on like a lot of like screens and slants. But they're like, no, he'll get used that way in the NFL and everything will work out. No, it turns out like John Gruden's just a donkey and doesn't understand that like the reason he was any bit successful in college was because his team knew how to use him. He doesn't know how to use him. For that reason, Nelson Aguilar is actually clearly the number 1 receiver. He has multiple games of 9 targets. He's been scoring at a crazy clip. I think if you are going to stack Derek Carr, you're either double stacking Darren Waller, Nelson Aguilar, or you're going with the nut leverage and playing Nelson Aguilar without Darren Waller. That's only because the ownership, you really don't gain much of an advantage, I don't believe, by playing just a simple Darren Waller and Derek Carr stack.
I'm with you, and Gino says in the chat he'd rather just try to play Josh Jacobs and gain leverage that way than stack Carr with anyone. And I think I kind of agree. We'll get to running back, though. We'll talk about Josh Jacobs' ownership as well. There's one player I want to ask you about at the quarterback position on Fanduel specifically, and it is our former tight end, Taysom Hill. He's coming in at 7,300, so he's right around the same price range as Derek Carr. He always is going to bring, I think, an interesting level of game theory to the table because of his rushing upside. I always try to compare him to other rushing quarterbacks, and he's not quite a Lamar Jackson. He's not quite a Kyler Murray. If anyone, I think he's more similar to like a Tim Tebow, except with more passing volume. So he's really an anomaly to himself. But I do think, like we saw last week, maybe playing him naked is optimal, which is also something that's pretty difficult for me. And now he's come up in price. Do you have any interest in what appears to be a contrarian Taysom Hill at 3.2% ownership?
Yeah, I still think I don't want to necessarily play him naked. And now that he's more expensive or listed as a quarterback, I guess, now that he's both expensive and listed as a quarterback, it means that, sure, he can still get there on the ground, but he needs a bigger day to pay off his, up price now. So maybe that still comes with 2 touchdowns and 75 yards on the ground. Maybe he doesn't need to get there passing. But it's more likely now that for him to pay off his value on FanDuel, that he has to at least do something as a passer. Maybe it's just 1 touchdown, maybe it's just 250 yards or something. But that does make me believe that stacking him now, at least, is definitely more optimal than playing him naked. And not only are you correlating, a ceiling game of him with a ceiling game of Thomas, but you're also just reducing the number of bets you have to get right. Like every lineup you look at is just a collection. It's a parlay. It's like trying to parlay all of your spots together. Like books won't let you parlay things that are correlated because they know it gives you a better chance. DFS isn't that way. So even though part of the allure in any stack is that not only are their ceiling outcomes tied together, but it means that I have to make less correct decisions. So playing a naked quarterback, while maybe mathematically, like with Taysom Hill, is optimal in finding a median projection, it doesn't give me any advantage in finding that, perfect parlay where I win a tournament. So for that reason, I think I'm either just kind of pushing against maybe a little bit of not negative correlation by any means, but just less positive correlation. Matt Ryan is always getting there passing. He's never running 2 touchdowns in. Taysom Hill can do that. So the correlation between him and a Thomas is not nearly as strong. But right now, our ownership on Thomas isn't egregious. I actually couldn't even, where is Michael Thomas? I was trying to...
He's in our leverage section for wide receivers because he's so low owned.
Yeah, I was scrolling. I was right now our ownership isn't that high because I didn't have the exact number because I had to scroll pretty far to find him. So I think if I'm playing Taysom Hill, I'm going to push against the headwind of having a much softer correlation between wide receiver 1 and quarterback and still stack him with him. Or, you could sell me on a Sanders or Cook, but I think Thomas is kind of the obvious one.
Yeah, I think so too. I wouldn't get anywhere different from there. We talk about fades at quarterback. I think fades are pretty clear cut. I think when you're talking about players like Baker Mayfield or maybe Jared Goff in this particular week with LA favored by a lot in a poor total game, I don't really think we need to argue this too much. They really need the game script to go much different than Vegas and bookmakers are projecting to really hit a ceiling game with how much they like to run. Do you have anything to add outside of, like the Derek Carr fade we talked about potentially going, like the potential Josh Allen fade? Anyone else you'd like to highlight?
No, I think Josh Allen is one of the easy ones. Daniel Jones right now it's not like egregious ownership, but he's coming in around 5%. Like you can catch me at 0. That's just another one sort of like the Baker Mayfield tier. There are guys like if you want to sell me on the upside of a Matt Ryan, Teddy Bridgewater, Cam Newton, like even Kirk Cousins, Taysom Hill, all of these guys are below 5%. I will hear arguments for those guys. I'm really not even considering like a Baker Mayfield or a Daniel Jones, especially with like a Jones. That game total I think is one of the lowest on the slate in the Giants versus Cincy. I don't see Cincy. Yeah, I think it is. It's like it was at 43. Oh, it's up. Oh boy, it is up to 44. Now we are cooking with gasoline, and I still think that makes it tied for the lowest on the slate. So for that reason, like it's a low game total. His opponent doesn't project to not only they don't project to score, they project to be one of the least efficient offenses. I mean, Brandon Allen under center. It's just like the ugliest game. I don't get why if you're building any amount of lineups, you would allocate some of them to Daniel Jones when they're like Cam Newton. I think is an interesting contrarian pivot. Daniel Jones is not.
I agree with you. As we move through the slate, guys, we reference a lot of the tools at Awesemo.com. We're talking a lot about ownership. We'll talk about stacks later. If you want to get access to all of these great tools and content for nearly every DFS sport out there, with an Awesemo Plus weekly pass, it's just $29.95. This includes full access to all the premium content and tools on Awesemo.com, including player projections, ownership projections, our premium Slack channel, and much more. If you're only looking to play NFL, then sign up for our NFL weekly package for $14.95 or give our NFL Express weekly pass a shot for $3.95. You really can't go wrong. These are the best tools on the market. It's what Kyle and I use, what Alex Awesemo Baker himself creates. They're fantastic. Kyle, as we move to the running back position, so I have to take a look quick because they did change. And actually, they didn't really change that much compared to what we have in our show sheet. James Robinson is still the most owned running back on the slate. I think this is mainly a price thing with him coming in at 7.4K. I think Fanduel did the right thing with Dalvin Cook and put him up to 11K. He is still coming in with 24.1% ownership, which is mind-blowing to me. This is, I think, someplace we should start. So these are the two most owned running backs on the slate. They're nearly the same. We have James Robinson, clearly a price play, and Dalvin Cook at 11K, obviously because of his superior performance. Are you willing to go to Cook? Are you willing to go to Robinson? How do we handle this situation?
Man, I hate to say it. I think Robinson would be maybe the one because the ownership is the same for all intents. It's 0.3% different. So we'll just talk about it as if they're the same ownership. If I'm looking at these guys, maybe Robinson is the one I go to, but I think I'm going to come in under the field on both. Like we don't have, even when Dalvin Cook was like 9,500, he was like our best value on FanDuel because the pricing on FanDuel lets you get up to these guys, and the difference between him and like a 7K or whatever, like a 7.5K Josh Jacobs or something, like 9.2K Dalvin Cook is like almost always like the best value of the slate just because he projects for so much touchdown equity, so much yardage. It is simply that like at 9 whatever K, you're probably just playing a lot of him. At 11K, we actually don't have him as like a great value. I think he's just outside of our top 5 values, but that also leaves a lot of room for if he doesn't score the touchdowns, if he just goes for like 120 and Justin Jefferson or Kyle Rudolph even steals the touchdowns, he absolutely slaughters the lineups of those who play him because he needs to have a massive day at 11K. Like, and I agree. Actually, it's a really good price point because you see 24% ownership. Like, if pricing was perfect, every player would be owned the exact same. Obviously, there are going to be like biases involved, and then if pricing isn't perfect, that's where you get different. But I think it's a good price. Like, it's a very interesting conversation point where at like 9K it wasn't. I think I come in under the field though. I think the odds of him paying off his value here are not great, and the odds of him just putting up 14, 15 points and, ruining every single lineup that plays him, they're good enough that I'm going to go for it. James Robinson, like you said, simply a price play. I don't see a ton of touchdown equity, and on FanDuel, touchdowns matter even more because there are no bonuses. You get less points for the receptions. Touchdowns didn't get nerfed on FanDuel, so they end up being more valuable relative to the rest of the ways you can score points. I don't see how, with Mike Glennon under the center, that this team is going to put up enough points for me to be excited about them. Jacksonville only has a 21.5 implied team total. The argument for him is simply that he gets all the touches last week. He didn't give up a running back touch until the final drive when the game was entirely over. It's like Devine Ozigbo got some receptions. Before that, it was every target, every carry on the team, every target for the backfield at least went to him. I get why that's exciting. Like it's incredible market share numbers. I'm hunting for touchdowns though, and I'm not sure if he gets them.
I'm the same way with James Robinson. It's the concern with him every time he comes in highly owned. When we have someone who's so fragile and on a team that scores to project such a little amount of points every single week, and I know they've outperformed expectation in a couple of these games. The Green Bay one stands out. I mean, I wasn't playing him that week either because they were 14-point underdogs. It's typically the approach I play on these underdog teams, especially when the spread is pretty severe. After Dalvin Cook and James Robinson, I mean, so the Dalvin Cook thing, it's so hard to roster him at this price for me. I mean, exactly half the price you can get Kalen Ballage. 5.5K on Fanduel. You can go and roster Kalen Ballage, which is absolutely, assuming, like Eckler doesn't play or anything, I think that is just a superior play straight up. And we'll talk about Ballage's potential leverage on this slate. But behind James Robinson, behind Dalvin Cook, some of our most owned runners, Mike Davis, he comes in right around 20%, as does Josh Jacobs. An interesting name that's climbed, he is also in this very cheap price range, is Wayne Gallman. If people are punting the running back position, it looks like Gallman will carry some ownership at 15.2%. Of course, they're playing Cincinnati, and Cincinnati no longer has their signal caller, so you get game script in his favor. What do you make of Gallman at such a cheap price?
Yeah, Gallman, I'm surprised people are on him. Maybe it's just because earlier in the week, like you said, I think he's been rising a little bit. So I'm surprised people are willing to go to him. I don't think it's a bad play, though. Like, they really don't have, Deion Lewis is going to take very little work away from him. They don't have backup running backs that are going to get much run. And he's been playing well. Like, he has been modestly efficient. He's been scoring touchdowns. I get why you would go to him. It's just another spot where I think the game environment is just meh. Maybe it's because he's a favorite against a bad team. His defense should have no problem getting them the ball back on offense. I get why you would go there. I think, if I'm building like 20 or 150 lineups, I would just let whatever happens with him. I wouldn't X him out. If I'm building by hand, I'm not sure, like in a single entry 3 max, he really makes my player pool because I think there are better plays. But I get it. I think he's perfectly fine. He's a favored running back. He gets most of the work. His team just isn't projected to score a ton of points. But at his price, that's okay. So, I have strong takes on Dalvin Cook. I really don't think you're really too interested in playing him at his price. At his price, Wayne Gallman's fine.
Assuming that there's no return of Austin Eckler to the Chargers backfield, I'm just going to play Kalen Ballage for him. And we can start talking about a couple leverage points. We've hit on Jacobs a little bit. I think his ownership is probably appropriate. It's a high-scoring game environment against Atlanta, and he's 20%, which isn't egregious for him. This is kind of the ownership range where I start having difficult decisions with Josh Jacobs. When he's low-owned, I'm like, all right, we're riding with Josh Jacobs this week. And when he's high-owned, usually cresting that 20% mark, I'm like, okay, game script goes awry. We're fading Josh Jacobs, hoping that, they put in some other pass-catching backs and Devontae Booker. In this particular week, I think he's pretty efficient. With the Wayne Gallman ownership, again, Kalen Ballage, 5.5K. He has seen just an absolute monstrous workload, and he is an access point to this LA Chargers Buffalo game. Are you interested at all in Ballage?
Yeah, like we said, assuming Austin Eckler doesn't play, Austin Eckler, I believe, practiced Wednesday and was activated off the injured reserve. But we also had Sony Michel activated 2 weeks ahead of being put on the roster, although he got healthy scratched anyways. I believe Christian McCaffrey was activated and then at least was out another week until. So that doesn't really tell us too much. We'll talk about it now as if he isn't in play. If he is,
it happened with Lazard too, right?
Yes, it did. Yeah, exactly. He got activated at least a week, maybe 2 weeks before as well. So it doesn't really tell us a lot. Maybe actually the trend is that you get activated a week in advance, essentially. So maybe we can talk about a little more optimism around Kalen Ballage. Yeah, he's been getting such incredible volume. The team plays fast. I believe they're a top 10 in pace and top 10 in run percentage. They score a ton of points. Right now in the 3 starts or pseudo starts, the first one technically wasn't a start. It was the one Justin Jackson got hurt. He's averaging 16 carries and I believe 6 targets, which is kind of the most interesting thing is that he's taken on both the bulk of the running work and most of the backfield targets, and they throw to the running backs a lot. So I think, like you said, I don't think Wayne Gallman is necessarily a bad play by any means, but why wouldn't you take? I feel like Kalen Ballage, maybe it's because he's an underdog, but really that's not a weak argument. But for me, it's an okay way because we don't see the Chargers win a ton of games. They just play efficiently and lose because their defense can't stop teams. It's not like they're an underdog, their offense is bad. So I'm fine with Kalen Ballage. I mean, I like Kalen Ballage a lot. In fact, I think at the price point, he ends up being a far superior play to Wayne Gallman. You talked about Jacobs. I think Jacobs is a better play, both, raw play and at his price even than James Robinson. So maybe that's the argument you can throw at him, is that if you're taking one of James Robinson or Josh Jacobs, both hovering between that, 20 to 25% range, essentially, I would go with Jacobs. They're favorites. They run the ball incessantly when they are winning. And we saw that versus like Denver. We've seen it versus a few other teams, and they've been winning a lot lately. And they play a terrible Atlanta defense. And maybe the most interesting thing is that the run back options, I think it would make a lot of sense to stack a Jacobs, that assumes that his team gets out to a lead. On the other hand, that means that Atlanta is probably losing and passing a lot. They're one of the pass heaviest teams in the NFL. The run back options are actually really low owned right now. Like all of the Calvin Ridley, I believe Julio Jones are all coming in as pretty modestly owned. So although Jacobs himself isn't going to be unique in any sense of the word, about a fifth of the field will have him. Jacobs plus Julio Jones, Jacobs plus, I don't know what Hayden Hurst's ownership is, but Jacobs plus these Falcons run backs, that could be a way to build leverage off of your Jacobs lineups. And it also builds leverage off of the Derek Carr lineups.
I agree with you. I'm fine with Jacobs in this particular context because you're gaining leverage with him off a couple of marquee players in the same price range and in the same game. But ultimately, I think there are some other leverage plays that I might even have more interest in. And one in particular that comes in just 8.5% ownership, I think it's partially because he's a little bit expensive at 8.4K on Fanduel, is Nick Chubb. And people are a little bit scared of Nick Chubb because of the timeshare. I get it. However, this is similar to a Los Angeles Chargers situation. And no, Cleveland's not quite as fast as LA, but they're running more raw running plays. In his 2 games since returning from injury, 19 carries and 20 carries. And that's with Kareem Hunt seeing 19 and 13 himself, respectively. So you're getting a team here in the Cleveland Browns. When they're ahead, they are just going to run the ball incessantly. This week, they do come in with a favorable matchup against Jacksonville. They're about a touchdown favorite in this spot. Nick Chubb is easily seeing about 20 carries a game, which isn't too far off of a Josh Jacobs. It's even arguably a little bit better than a James Robinson, who's going to be a negative game script. And then he has the touchdown equity that James Robinson lacks. So if we're going to talk about just contrarian plays at similar price points, give me Nick Chubb over a guy like James Robinson in your large field tournaments. Do you have any qualms with that? How would you approach a situation like Nick Chubb where he isn't a timeshare, but I still think there's clear upside?
He's in a timeshare, but his team wants to run the ball more than any other team in the league. They right now are passing at a fewer, that's like under 30 times per game, and they've been running efficiently. They have a defense that has been good enough. I don't think it's great, but they're also like, whenever they play bad opponents, they've been fine. Like we see them kind of crush like teams like the Eagles, or like I think the Raiders came in and they held them to a pretty low score as well. So like the defense is good enough to let their offense just run the damn ball, which I mean, I don't love as a way to generate points as a team, but I do love it as a way to generate fantasy points for someone like Nick Chubb, who, although, like you said, he's splitting work, he's getting a pretty sizable cut of maybe the largest rushing pie in the NFL. It's perfect Thanksgiving conversation talking about his cut of the pie. And he gets a lot of the biggest pie in the NFL, arguably. So because, sure, he's in a committee backfield, maybe that scares some people off. Maybe that's why his ownership is coming in so low. But we know he has like 150-yard multi-touchdown upside. He gets it should be like a really easy opponent for him this week. And he acts as really good leverage off of Robinson, who, although has a pretty solidified pass catching role, that doesn't really add a ton of value on FanDuel. You're more looking at, well, can your team control the ball? Can they give you 25 plus carries? And can you convert that to touchdowns? All of those things seem like they're not going to be happening for James Robinson. And on the other side of the ball, obviously it will, if Vegas is anything close to right, will be happening for Nick Chubb. So I love Nick Chubb both on DraftKings and on FanDuel, where I feel a little more comfortable getting up to that. He's a little expensive, but we have the salary on FanDuel. So I think he is a really good leverage spot. I'll throw one more back to you. We really don't know what's going to happen with the Miami backfield, but right now, maybe Myles Gaskin comes back. If he does come back, Salvon Ahmed logged a DNP on Wednesday. I'd just be jamming him in. It's kind of like the Austin Eckler situation. We really don't know with one back returning potentially. If Gaskin plays and Ahmed doesn't, it's just wheels up against the Jets. And if Ahmed ends up playing, if he ends up coming through this DNP and playing and Gaskin doesn't, exact same thing. I think we have like two potential workhorse backs. If only one of them is on the field, I'm jamming that guy.
I'm with you 100%. I love that situation. And it's partially because of the uncertainty. There's a chance that decision could come down to game day. And yes, when we see those happen, those players tend to come in under-owned. It happened even just 2 weeks ago with the same Miami backfield. We thought it was going to be Salvon Ahmed as the lead guy. We didn't actually know until right before kickoff, and they late scratched Jordan Howard. Boom, he's out of the game. Salvon Ahmed was pretty clearly going to see a majority of the work in that instance. So I do like waiting for these situations when they appear. I think we could get one of these situations, and I'm with you. It doesn't really matter who's going to be out there for Miami as the running back. They're playing the New York Jets, and they're both below 6K on FanDuel. So I'm certainly interested in both of them as runners. I know you and I had, I believe, Salvan Ahmed written up in our show sheet as one of the top guys to look at in this situation. And I think that is more than the case. As far as other players to maybe look at the running back position, I think we talked most of our fades already. One player I want to ask you about is Todd Gurley. If you had any interest in him as a potential leverage point in that particular highly owned Atlanta game.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting because if Todd Gurley manages to pull down like 25 carries, it probably means that Atlanta actually won this game and controlled the clock fairly well. He would be like ultimate leverage off of all of the Raiders, who are all coming in at various levels of being pretty popular. So it'd be really interesting. I don't think that's his most likely path to upside. I think his most likely path is a shootout because of what he's done best. And the only thing he's done really well from a fantasy perspective. So right now he's number 2 in the NFL in red zone carries. So it seems like more or less he thrives in shootouts and just happens to find the touchdowns because they use him a lot in the red zone. But running him without the run back would be like a really contrarian approach. Otherwise, if you want to go like super leverage, I think you could also play him with Nelson Aguilar. I will say though, like if you want to play Darren Waller or Derek Carr, these guys, maybe the most contrarian way is to play like a Todd Gurley. Because I don't think anyone's going to be on him despite him having a ton of touchdown equity, which is actually perfect for FanDuel as well.
Yeah, I think that's the case too. It's a really interesting spot when you can find someone who has a path to a ceiling in those kind of games, but is for whatever reason coming in under owned. As far as everything we talked about today, guys, we do have some free content on Awesemo. There's free content every single day. Today we have MMA projections, so make sure to check that out. There's likely some more that has popped up since the show started. So of course, check those out whenever it is available. As far as the wide receiver position, this is one where we typically do see some concentrated chalk. It's obviously correlated with the quarterback, and we are seeing that this week with Stephon Diggs coming in as the most owned wide receiver. He is north of 25%. Outside of Stephon Diggs, there is only one other receiver north of 20. So you are eating some pretty clear ownership with the Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen stack. Any way you're going to get to this, like maybe if you want to play Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen, you just have to be contrarian around it. How are you approaching this stack?
I don't think I'm approaching the stack. It just seems like I am basically playing a lineup that a fifth of the field is going to have more or less, maybe a sixth of the field. But that is really difficult for me to palate. And like on the other side, the obvious run back is also super popular. So I will say if you were just dead set on playing, Allen, or if you're dead set on playing Allen Diggs, I wouldn't do Allen Diggs Allen. I'd maybe go Allen Diggs. Even Beasley is coming in as number 5 owned right now. Maybe you could go with like a Diggs, Allen, Mike Williams, and Gabriel Davis. I do think you have to get not only contrarian, but very contrarian if you're playing just the Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen builds. I don't think it's impossible. It definitely could hit. It's just for me, I think there are better ways to get contrarian because like essentially when you look at what you're having to do to get weird when you play Allen Diggs, you have to do some really suboptimal things to get a unique build, a high leverage build. So for that reason, I think I can increase my overall projection and still be just as, if not more contrarian by just going to a different stack. And you can play this game as one-offs as well. Like Ballage versus Beasley is going to be relatively unpopular. I mean, Beasley top 5 owned, but he's not above 20%. Ballage drawing very little ownership. So you can play that. Mike Williams not drawing a ton of ownership. I'd rather approach this game as either stacking Justin Herbert or just using it as not only one-offs, but probably the weird one-offs.
I definitely prefer the LA side, and it's partially because if you're running an Allen Diggs lineup and you're looking to secondary stack this, Cole Beasley's top 5 owned too. If you're looking to run it back on the other side with someone, Keenan Allen, he's top 5 ownership. He's actually number 2 most owned wide receiver on the entire slate. So I think unless you're taking like a Herbert, Mike Williams, Hunter Henry approach, Hunter Henry also coming in with a fair bit of ownership himself, which we'll get to. This is one of the games I might end up just flat Xing out. And it's hard to really say that when we come in with a game that is just so much fantasy goodness on both sides. But this is the slate of the DFS industry that we work in and we live in right now. Outside of these guys, I do think there's some contrarian options in the top 5 most owned plays. One in particular where we didn't see a lot of quarterback ownership, but we are getting a couple highly owned receivers is Robbie Anderson and Justin Jefferson. Of course, this is the Carolina verse Minnesota game. This is an interesting situation. I think you can need a bit of chalk here with these receivers. One easy way to do so is just, well, let's correlate them with a quarterback. Neither of them are top 5 owned. Very reasonable there. Clear run backs on the opposite sides of the ball that are lower owned. Any interest in these two receivers and I guess this overall game?
Oh, yeah, this is a game that I definitely want to target. And I think you laid out the perfect path for how to do it is that like anytime. So let's say I play Robbie Anderson. I know that anytime Robbie Anderson scores, me and all the other Robbie Anderson stands are getting 6 points in whatever yardage he got. If I just play Teddy Bridgewater, I am getting like 1 2/3 or whatever of the points. Like I'm getting a massive bonus on the touchdowns he scores because for the most part, it doesn't really look like people are playing him. The same thing on the other side with Kirk Cousins. I'd probably rather approach it from the Teddy Bridgewater angle because I do think like Minnesota's philosophy is just that they do not want to pass the football, which is insane that they wouldn't because of their receivers. But I guess when you have Dalvin Cook, you can choose to do that. So I'd rather use them as my run back option and then play like a Teddy Bridgewater stack. And it's just a perfect way to tap into, one, a good game environment, two, like good values. I think basically all of the Panthers just seemingly come in underrated every week because they have a good passing attack and they're so concentrated. They just don't have a fourth receiver. They don't have a tight end. And even more recently, Mike Davis hasn't gotten a ton of receiving works. They are so concentrated that you know when their offense goes off, you got like a 1 in 3 shot of getting the pass catcher that really goes off right. So for that reason, I do really like both, just the individual plays, but stacking them with the Teddy Bridgewater.
Yeah, it's really nice too. And it's easy to gain some leverage here. I mean, you can easily go, if we want to just parlay this over to the leverage conversation in this particular game, I think there's really good options just with the Carolina team. Probably most interesting to me is DJ Moore. This is certainly a price thing. He is 7.3K on Fanduel. They've kind of botched his pricing a little bit this year, and he typically is coming in a little more expensive comparatively to what he does on DraftKings. With that said, it's generally driving lower ownership, and we know DJ Moore has a ceiling. If you want to go cheaper, we also have Curtis Samuel coming in below 10% ownership too. And his role has steadily increased in the offense. I do think he's usable at this point, at least 9 targets in 2 of his last 3 games. On the Minnesota side, it's really interesting to see Adam Thielen come in with low ownership. He's sub 10% too. And that's immediately after a huge game for him. This is compared to Justin Jefferson, who's in the top 5. So I think we can comfortably play some of these contrarian options. Maybe you end up with a Minnesota tight end just to fill that spot too if you want to double correlate and be different there. But ultimately, there's a ton of, I think, just raw pivot points on this slate. As far as the other highly owned receivers, it's out of the top 5, all 5 are in these 2 games. So I don't think there's a ton else to talk about in this high owned range. Everyone else, there's 6 other players that are above 10%. No one coming in above 13%. So, I mean, that's the likes of, Robert Woods is in this range, Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins. There are a lot of your alphas. I think you can eat the ownership with any of these individual plays just in your stacks because the ownership isn't too egregious with them. Is there anyone you particularly like? Or are you kind of comfortable with them all if they end up in your stacks?
Yeah, it's more about if they end up in my stacks. I will throw 2 things back at you. One, Adam Thielen right now is questionable for this game because he tested positive for COVID, then he tested negative, and they believe maybe that was a false positive. So, in the spirit of the start sit show, I have a team that has Taysom Hill at tight end on FanDuel on ESPN, and I refuse to take him out. I have Adam Thielen in, and I might even just be like, I'm taking the 0. I won't take him out. You can't make me. So it really depends on what happens with him. I do think though, because we won't know until. At this point, if we don't know today, we won't know at least until Saturday. That could keep his ownership low. And he has such an incredible red zone role that I think he always ends up being the really interesting play. People love Justin Jefferson. I get it. He's I think he started 7 games and has 4 100-yard games in that span because he got his first start in week 3. He's the exciting new shiny toy, but Adam Thielen always ends up being good leverage off him and off Dalvin Cook, obviously, because of his ability to steal touchdowns and yardage from both. So I always kind of like Adam Thielen if he's healthy. I love Justin Jefferson, but people love him too. People don't want to go back to the old man Adam Thielen. He's been incredible this year. So really like Adam Thielen in the probably relatively low own range. And if you were still looking at ownership, refresh it again. It updated a minute before the show and again 15 minutes into the show. So there you go.
Oh, it's updated again? Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. I looked at it now and it says updated 24 minutes ago and we've been live for 41. So it has updated again. Nothing. I don't think it was anything major. I noticed it when we had John Brown still in. Gabriel Davis right now is one name that I just wanted to throw to you. If you're really looking for ways, I'm trying to reach around my mic and find out that 2.4% owned on Gabriel Davis, and he is a top 5 value projection for us. If you're looking for ways to get different attacking the the Buffalo game. That's kind of the one it seems like.
Yeah, I'm fine with Gabriel Davis. There's not a ton to add. He's cheap. He's been a very viable pass catcher in the past when John Brown has missed games. So I'm completely fine with him. I'd like to see how his ownership evolves throughout the week. It's already Friday here, so there's not a ton of time, but see if he gets any late week steam. As far as talking straight leverage, DJ from the chat brings up someone I want to get your take on, and it is Sammy Watkins. This is a game we haven't talked about much.
Yes.
They're actually not coming in with high ownership. This is the Chiefs we're talking about. They're playing in the game against Tampa Bay, which obviously is a phenomenal total. People always want to target the Chiefs, but for the most part, they're priced out of like double stacks. It's near impossible to take a Travis Kelce, a Tyreek Hill, and then throw a Pat Mahomes into that stack without running just complete punt plays around it. With Sammy Watkins returning to the fold, we do get a potential double stack option here where you could run Mahomes, Tyreek, Watkins, or insert Travis Kelce if you prefer. How viable do you think Sammy Watkins is in his return, assuming he does make his debut?
Oh, I love me some Sammy Watkins. You'll never talk me off of playing Sammy Watkins. He's cheap. He's attached to Patrick Mahomes. He's not going to be popular. And he's in every, the thing they do whenever they lose Sammy Watkins is every other week they're playing a different number 2 receiver, whether it be like Byron Pringle out of nowhere the last time we saw them, I believe. And more often than not, like a lot of Demarcus Robinson, but then Mecole Hardman steals the touchdown. They simply don't do that with Sammy Watkins. When he's healthy, he's an every down player. And this year he was actually an every down player drawing targets. Like last year, that was kind of the disappointment, is that even when he was playing on all downs, didn't draw a ton of targets. Like his targets per route wasn't particularly impressive. Early in the year, he was drawing like 3 games of, I believe, 7 or more targets, and he had played essentially like 4 because he missed one. If he's going to be targeted a lot by Patrick Mahomes and is cheap, I mean, that is just the spot of all spots. And he's in a game that, I mean, we haven't talked about it a lot. I just think it's because, we generally view it as an ownership thing. And these guys are all coming in as fairly low owned, or like the Chiefs are kind of the popular plays. And, play the Chiefs when you can play the Chiefs is kind of the thing. I like attacking it from a Brady stack with a Chiefs run back. I'd argue, actually, this is a really good spot to do a double run back as well, like a 3+2, because you can have, Patrick Mahomes is so expensive that you can have a good game from Kelce, a good game from Watkins because you adjust for his price, and a good game doesn't require a lot. And the points per dollar simply still doesn't add up for Mahomes, and it does for Brady. So this is like the nut spot for a 3+2, which is typically a little interesting to get to. It doesn't hit it like a super high clip. This is kind of the spot of all spots for that.
Yeah, I think it might need to be a lower scoring slate for that to work. But so you're talking about liking Brady. You're talking about liking these Tampa Bay stacks, Kyle. Give it to me. Who are we stacking Brady with?
So I don't have any strong convictions on who we stack Brady with. All of them, they're all running like similar routes. Like Antonio Brown runs fewer routes, but he gets targeted at a higher clip on a per route basis. That's kind of how he was used in the one game with New England too, is that he's not an every down player. They get him on the downs that matters, like the downs where he's going to be a first or second read. For me, I guess I give like the most modest of leans to Chris Godwin, because our priors on these guys, like they're all kind of mixed up. Our priors on Brown a few years ago are that he's the best receiver in the league and one of the best ever. But, it's been a long time since we've seen him play. Does lead the team in air yards, I believe. I think my most important thing is that I'm probably double stacking these guys because outside of a rushing touchdown, which Brady has like 3 of on the year, he's really drawing dead to do anything with his legs ever. And that rushing touchdown is even rare. It's not impossible, but it's rare. So I'm double stacking. I would say maybe I'd rank them Godwin, Evans, Brown, but the air yards maybe say Brown. I don't have any strong leans. I'm sorry, I can't bring this to you. It's more of if I'm playing 20 lineups, I'm playing a lot of Brady lineups, and I'm going to have my bases covered with my mix of receivers. In a single entry, I guess give me, Brown, Godwin.
That's how I would prefer to. I think I like Godwin quite a bit. This is based mainly on priors, but I think he could grow back into a nice role as he just is further removed from injury. We have about 200 of you watching the stream. Thank you guys very much for being here. Appreciate all your questions in the chat and your support. Hit that thumbs up button if you enjoy the program. It is the best way to support Kyle, myself, and the entire Awesemo team. As we move over to tight end here, we have some more free content on awesemo.com. Not exactly content. This is a free tool, and it is one of my favorite tools on the entire site. It is our odd shopper tool. This allows you to look at different lines, totals, even player props across the various American sports books. Find the best line for whatever it is you are interested in, and that greatly increases your ROI over the course of an entire season. Just finding the best lines at the various books. There's also a couple of other facets to this tool. You can set alerts when bets hit a certain mark. That way you get notified and you can take them immediately. You can also track your own bets with this tool. It is fantastic to just even know how you're doing it. It makes it so easy. All of this can be found at oddshopper.awesemo.com, and it's free. So why not check it out? My favorite tool on the Awesemo program. All right, Kyle, we have to talk about it every single week. Sometimes I wish we didn't. Last week, we actually didn't because Taysom Hill was the lock of all locks, but we have to talk tight ends. And every time we start with tight end, it's okay. Do we have Kittle? Do we have Kelsey? Do we have Waller? We have Kelsey and Waller this week. No surprise, they are both north of 20%. Kelsey is coming in near 29%. Even though he has an 8K price tag, it does not matter. People are still jamming in Travis Kelsey. How do you handle the first two expensive guys?
Yeah, I think my approach for them is going to be, I'll probably end up being lower than the field on Waller specifically, just because if his team is going to be favored, like there's a decent chance that they don't end up running a lot, or they don't end up passing a lot. They don't run Waller a lot. So, I mean, that's kind of what we've seen in the past too, is the Waller like spike games come in their like fun, like underdog shootout type games. And when they're favorites, it doesn't end up going as well for him. So he would be the one I would lean to. Our ownership or our points per dollar projection actually has Kelsey as kind of a significant favorite to outscore him in terms of a value play as well. Although Waller's still number 2 with another big gap between him and the next guy. So I'm not going to be unowned on Waller. I just think the only times I'm playing him are in like Matt Ryan runbacks, or I guess like, you know, even one-offs like a Calvin Ridley plus a Waller. But he's a player who I'm mostly only correlating when I play, just because one, he's more game script dependent. Just this whole Raiders offense is kind of high variance in whether they are like super run heavy or super pass heavy. It just depends on the game script. So I think he's more of a specific build play. Travis Kelsey can go off at any time. Doesn't matter. And this team also is less game script dependent. We saw even versus like the Jets, a team they were expected to kill. They did kill, and they still kept passing pretty late into the game. So he's much less dependent on his team being an underdog, which also like never happened. So Kelsey would be my preferred play. I'm not going to be unowned on Waller. It's just that he has to be correlated, whereas Kelsey doesn't.
I agree with you. I strongly prefer Kelsey. I just think he's an easier stacking partner with Mahomes. Waller, it's tough for me to target Vegas, but Waller has been so good this year, so I think I'll get some of him too. Outside of these two, I'm typically trying to pay down at tight end. Fanduel makes it a little interesting just with their overall pricing structure. They don't go quite as low as DraftKings, so it's harder to just completely punt. Like, for example, there's not a huge difference between someone at the minimum price and then just looking through the list. You know, you can find like someone at 5K like Jordan Reed, who's only 1,000 above the minimum, but Jordan Reed is still like significantly better than most min-price tight ends. So I often find myself in this middle price range on FanDuel more often than on DraftKings. There's some interesting names in here. Hunter Henry's 5.9K. He's the third most owned tight end at just 9.9%. You can see the big difference between the big two and then the subsequent tight ends after. Austin Hooper's in this range. Evan Ingram's in this range. If you're pivoting away from Kelsey and Waller, where are you primarily looking?
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything below those two guys is a pivot. 'Cause like you said, our number 3 owned tight end is less than 10%, while the other two guys are above 21% each, you know, Kelsey approaching 30. I think Hunter Henry would probably be kind of the obvious one. I guess this is my way of saying I'm probably not getting too weird at tight end. And it kind of does end up being harder on FanDuel because the punt plays on DraftKings are like, oh, well, if my guy gets, 3 for 30 and a touchdown at 2.7, that's really good value. You simply, the way they price, don't have that. Like, I like Irv Smith, but at 5,200, like, doesn't cost that much more to get up to a Darren Waller. So, Irv Smith is interesting to me. He was taking on a pretty solid pass catching role, but the only way he ever finds one of my lineups is like in a very heavy approach of Carolina at Minnesota. Given that Hunter Henry now scoring in back-to-back games, that shouldn't be surprising. I believe we've seen 4 targets in every single game this year. Like, he's an every down tight end at a position where tight end's terrible. He's going to be on the field almost every single down for an offense that has been producing touchdowns and yardage at an insane clip in a game we want to target. I think at 10%, I know he's the number 3 owned tight end, but he still provides really good leverage off of like a Kelsey and off of Waller. I like correlating him with like a Gabriel Davis, even maybe Cole Beasley, but obviously stacking him with Justin Herbert as well. Like, I'll have a lot of double stack Justin Herberts with Hunter Henry, and I think Mike Williams is a really good leverage approach, but you can also just go chalk. Like, Keenan Allen's also just a great play. So you can go Keenan Allen, Justin Herbert, Hunter Henry, and the ownership on the non-Keenan Allen players in that stack is fairly palatable. Outside of that, I have so much love for Tom Brady that I kind of have to throw a little bit towards Gronk. I'm not sure what his target volume is going to be when they have arguably the best 3 wide receiver set to ever grace an NFL field. Like, does that really cap his target volume? Maybe, and he's expensive at 6,200, but he also has big play upside. He's got a fairly high ADOT for a tight end, and he's really not like he's not going to come off the field very much. They run, like, we've seen some snaps for Cameron Brate, but that's mostly 2 tight end sets. It's not like they take Gronk off the field. And he started off the year mostly as a blocker. Now he is like really transitioned to, without OG Howard, a very route heavy role. I'm not sure how many of those routes convert to targets, like I said, but he correlates well with something I already like doing. So I'll have some Gronk, although his price is less than ideal at 6,200.
Yeah, it's an interesting place to target Gronk. I mean, the 1.4% is certainly fantastic.
Yeah.
I ultimately have a hard time getting to tight ends like that unless they are correlated with my lineups. And honestly, this is going to sound horrifying to some of you guys, but like Gronk's target volume is not significantly better than Anthony Ferkser. And you and I have talked about this a couple of times, and I'm just going to use Ferkser as an example. Like, insert your bad tight end of choice who's like 5.5 can Fanduel, who's averaging 5 targets. Without Michael Pruitt in the lineup, Ferkser has target counts of 6, 3, and 5. He's the min price. He's running a route on about 50 to 55% of dropbacks, which isn't much better than most of your everyday tight ends in this range. So, I mean, if you're going to play, like, let's just look at pricing and ownership here. Like, Virgil Green is coming in with some ownership. If you're playing Virgil Green, why aren't you playing Ferkser? If you're playing Mike Gesicki, why aren't you playing Ferkser? If you're playing,
Dawson Knox, this is a good one. Why
you're playing Dawson Knox? Why are you not playing Ferkser?
Dude, you're playing. Why is Virgil Green, like, I guess he's 4K.
So is Ferkser.
Yeah, I don't understand this in the slightest.
If you're playing Austin Hooper, why aren't you playing Ferkser?
I agree with everything you said. I still think.
Why are you spending the extra salary for a tight end that's getting 5 targets?
Yeah, man, this Virgil Green one really has me kind of messed up, though. I feel under the weather at this point.
This is a spirited topic for me. I played Ferkser last week, and he had a fine day. I think he had like 9 points or something. And people are like, "How'd you get to Ferkser?" I'm like, "How did you get to Austin Hooper? How did you get to all these guys with 5 targets? Like, why didn't you just pay all the way up?" Anyway.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, man, this is some weird punt plays. I can't imagine ever going like, yeah, Ferkser's a good example. I think there are other guys too. Like, I don't know, Irv Smith is a little too expensive. Tyler Eifert kind of fills that role as well. Like, why would you
never score though? That's the thing with Eifert.
Maybe, yeah.
But Eifert does have better target volume than like Austin Hooper.
Virgil Green, like, that's insane.
Virgil Green is the worst one I've seen.
Dawson Knox too. Dawson Knox is a good example too, though. Like, I just think you're sure, like, could he score a touchdown? But man, like, Tyler Eifert is going to triple him in targets. And even if Tyler Eifert only gets 3 targets, he could triple him in targets.
I agree with you. All right, Kyle, before we head out of here, we have a couple minutes left. Let's talk some stacks. We have a fantastic tool on Awesemo.com. It is our top stacks tool. It gives the probability that each of these teams will be the top stack, along with a couple of other really useful things like how owned the stack is going to be, where you're gaining your leverage, and a number of other tools. So looking at the top stacks tool, I think this is a particularly interesting week to gain some leverage. One stack we talked about, actually not that much, just really in the realm of Sammy Watkins, is the Chiefs stack. And they come in with our highest probability of being the top stack on the week. And modest ownership, it is about the same as Buffalo at this point. But again, just a much higher chance of coming in as the top stack. That's one I'm certainly interested in. Are there any you're particularly interested in? I'm seeing we're gaining some leverage with that Tampa Bay stack you talked about. The chance of them being the highest stack is more than their overall quarterback ownership. So that's one I'm going to have some interest in. Where are you looking for overall stacks?
Yeah, so I talked about it a little bit earlier, not as much from the stacking perspective just as a game, but on the Falcons side of a game with a very high total, I am floored. I am flabbergasted. I am stunned by the fact that Julio Jones coming in at nearly 1% ownership and Calvin Ridley coming in. Calvin Ridley is like modestly popular, but he's still coming in at well under 10%. Like, I think Julio Jones at less than 2% is mind-boggling. Anytime Julio Jones steps on the field, I'm like inclined to at least play a little bit. When the game environment is supposed to be really good with one of the highest totals on the slate, he's an underdog, but he's also at home in the dome. Like, man, I will be playing a ton of Julio. And because of that, like, Matt Ryan also low owned is like the ideal stacking option. And for Julio at 8K to have a massive day, that probably means that Matt Ryan had a really good day as well. So Julio Jones plus Matt Ryan, it just feels like the easiest stack. I don't mind Calvin Ridley either, but I don't see there being a huge difference between these two guys. Both of them can go off on any game, and they're probably modestly negatively correlated to the other one, especially given their price. Like, you'd need 350 and 4 touchdowns for Ridley and Julio. Like you need that from Matt Ryan for both of them to hit. So for that reason, I'm probably not like double stacking a Ridley, Jones, and Ryan. So I'm just going to take the one who's 2% owned in Julio Jones.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I like that stack quite a bit. There's something I want to ask you about before we get off here. Let's see here. It's so it has Fanduel not included the Baltimore game on their main slate. Do you know if they're going to?
I don't know. I can pull it up real quick.
It's not on there right now.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't even know if it gets played. They might not have included it.
Okay, never mind. I was going to ask you if there obviously there's no Lamar Jackson, if we could get to Robert Griffin, but that's nor here nor there. So we can stick. Right, yeah. We can stick. I thought it would have been at least an interesting conversation to ask. One thing that really stood out to me with this top stacks tool that I want to point out to you guys is the Las Vegas Raiders quarterback ownership. It is the highest on the slate, just downright highest. And they are the 7th most likely to be the top stack on the slate with 3%. For reference, Kansas City's coming in with 21. Buffalo's coming in with 14. Obviously, this will change throughout the week too, but you're gaining, it's like negative leverage by playing the Las Vegas stack. So it's not something I'm typically on. The Carolina stack is another one that gains a ton of leverage. If you want to play the other side of this Minnesota game, Kyle and I talked at length about, Teddy Bridgewater to Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, even Curtis Samuel, run it back with whoever on the Vikings. That's another one I particularly like. Anything else for you, Kyle?
Yeah, I just think I kind of agree the way you were pointing it out is that just like it's really difficult for like you need a big game still from the Las Vegas Raiders, and our top stack tool just says it is not that likely. You get the same thing with like Daniel Jones and the Giants. Their top stack probability is like well under half of the odds that like the field projects them, I guess, based on the field's ownership. So I think I'm looking at like the mid to high price quarterbacks, mostly not the high price. I guess my only high price is like maybe some Kansas City. Our top stack tool really likes Kansas City. I think the double stack with Sammy Watkins, like I just, anytime you can tell me I can play Sammy Watkins, I'm such a fish. I'll do that any day. So I'm looking at like the more contrarian mid-high price guys, basically fading your Josh Allen, pivoting to a Justin Herbert, Matt Ryan's, and Tom Brady, just kind of where my bread's going to be made.
I agree with you. I love those stacks a lot. Well, guys, thanks for tuning in. Of course, hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel before we help out. Easiest way to support Kyle and myself. We are done with shows today, to my knowledge. Tomorrow, we have a whole slate of shows. Sunday, we have a whole slate of shows. Tomorrow kicks off with the college football show. It is me, Ben Raza, at 9:45 Eastern time, talking everything college football. I know there's some already on today. Hope you are enjoying it. College basketball is back too. Ben and I will be talking a little bit about that at some point in the future. Otherwise, make sure to check out all the shows. If you don't want to listen to the shows live or you just can't make it, check out our podcast network, another easy way to consume all the content we have here. Otherwise, he is Kyle Dvorchak at Kyle Tweets here. I am Matt Gajewski at Matt_Gajewski on Twitter. Good luck to everyone. We will see you again next week.